Hello, welcome to this little video where I'll be talking through CMI Assignment 501 and more specifically assessment criteria 1.4, which is, here we go, discuss the impact of organizational values and ethics on management decision making. So for this one, we need to discuss both values and ethics. Where are they the same and where are they different? And how have they influenced our decisions as managers? Also, very quickly, just to note the word discuss. What does that mean? It means that we need to give a detailed account, including a range of views or opinions, which include contrasting perspectives. So we need to say on one hand this, but on the other hand that. So it's about having a little bit of debate, even possibly little, different points of view woven into our discussion, into our response. Okay, hopefully in this little video, I'll be able to illustrate perhaps what that could look like. So what do we mean by values? Let's start with that. A little quote. The reference is just below there. Our values are beliefs about what is right and wrong and what is important in life. So what is right and wrong and what is important in life? So these are our values. And you might say values are really quite personal things, that they belong to the individual. But on the other hand, organizations have values, very often. Sometimes they're articulated, sometimes they're not quite so clear, they're a little bit more informal. But organizational values are a set of beliefs held by an organization. They all guide decisions and interactions. They can be formal or informal. So sometimes it's almost like they're like policy statements, aren't they? You have kind of like words on the wall, and you use them in how you do recruitment, performance management, and that type of thing. So they're kind of like a shared set of criteria that when you sign up to the organization that you need to work with and apply in how you make decisions and how you interact. I think there's a little bit of a tension really about this. Our values do they belong to the individual? Are they kind of about your personal beliefs, or can they be, if you like, realistically a shared set of beliefs that when you join the organization that you take on board, that you work with? Could there potentially be a little bit of a tension between the two? What if your organizational values are a little bit different to yours, your personal values? How might you navigate through that? As we don't need to go into loads of detail on that, but I think that would be an interesting thing just to touch on here. What happens if your values and your organization's values are a little bit different? How might you navigate through that as a manager? Now, ethics are slightly different. So ethics is a system of moral principles that include ideas about right and wrong and how people should or should not behave in general or specific cases. So a quote from the RSPCA there, who have wrote an interesting little article on what do we mean by ethics. So I would say that values are kind of guiding principles. Ethics are moral principles. So ethics are almost always moral. Values may or may not be moral in nature. So when we kind of think about these in the organization, so what might this look like in a business or in an organization? So our organizational ethics, they tend to be moral principles that ensure that our decisions are morally right, defensible, and just. It's about doing the right thing. They're ethics may be around honesty, integrity, being fair and right, and just morally centered in how we operate, moral agents. Values, on the other hand, are guiding principles for decision making. They may or may not be moral in nature, so they are kind of like these shared principles that we use and that we work through, but they're not by nature always moral. They might be, but they might not be. Okay, an example is Amazon's organizational values. And Amazon's got loads of organizational values, but just a couple are frugality and customer centricity. Now, so those are ways of working. They're principles that managers are expected to use and apply when making decisions. But you can see frugality and customer centricity, they're not quite the same as, say, having integrity or honesty. They're not quite the same as ethics, professional ethics. They're more, just a sort of decision-making principles that don't necessarily have an ethical basis. Whereas ethics, are always going to be moral in nature. So there is a little bit of a difference, I think. Ethics may also be more personal. That I think whereas organizational values can almost certainly be, if you like, shared principles that people use and apply when they become part of the organization. ethics are really how you differentiate between right and wrong. Um, so I think you could say that, what one point I would make here is that whereas, organizational values can be shared across the organization, that people can be expected to sign up to when you work in that place. Ethics, I think that fundamental thing about right and wrong, it's what does your conscience tell you, I think tend to be a little bit more personal in nature. Just my point of view. So when we're writing the assignment, we need to give two examples, I would say. This is what I would recommend. So one, I would talk about organizational values. When have you used organizational values to influence a decision or an interaction as a manager? So that's the first example. Those could be formal organizational values or informal organizational values, but just one example. When have you used organizational values to influence a decision? Could also be when you've observed another person use organizational values to influence a decision or interaction. So it doesn't have to be you, but it just be your observation from your context. The second example should be about when have you used or observed others using ethics to influence a decision or interaction. What you can do then, having given those two examples, one orientated around values, so those shared decision-making criteria, and one orientated around ethics, which is that moral basis. Do you think that values and ethics differ? Do they influence you in different ways? What do you think about this? Is it different? Is it all just one and the same, or do you think it does make a difference when you refer to values, particularly organizational values, or ethics when it comes to navigating through uncertainty or when we need to make difficult decisions? So, for example, I don't know, when you've perhaps had to give critical feedback to a colleague, how might organizational values or ethics influence how you approach that? I think things like, when organizations had to respond to COVID, back in 2020, it was really uncertain and unclear. There was no guiding policy for an awful lot of organizations. So what they had to do is they had to go to values, but also, so for organizational values, they'd be helpful to some extent, but also what feels right. What do you believe is the right thing to do in those sorts of circumstances or situations, where there is no one answer. There are multiple approaches. And so what we tend to do is go to our values and our ethics. But yeah, how do you think values and ethics might be differ? Have they influenced you in different ways? That's the discussion to have. This is the nub of it, really, and I think this is the bit that really matters in responding to this question. So that's it. That's 1.4. Yep, definitely two examples there, and a bit of a discussion about the role of values and ethics. And I hope that video has been helpful. This one is a little bit more tricky. I think this is one of the assessment criteria that does get a fair few referrals. The reason being, I think, is that people talk about values and ethics as if they're one and the same thing. And I think what we need to do is tease them apart and look at how they might be a little bit different, and that they might influence how we work in slightly different ways. Good. Thank you very much. Look forward to the next video on 1.5.